Tonight with us we have Tariq Ramadan, one of the world's leading academics in the field of Islamic studies. He was born in Switzerland after his family was exiled from Egypt, where his grandfather had founded the Muslim Brotherhood. His career has been slightly controversial. The United States denied him access to the country. The United States denied him access to the country for 5 years, eventually lifting the ban with a form signed by Hillary Clinton. Time magazine named him one of the top 100 most influential intellectuals in the world in 2004. He's here tonight to talk about what's next for the Arab Spring. He also has this book, The Arab Awakening, that he'll be signing for anyone that wants to buy one afterwards. So please join me in welcoming Tariq Ramadan.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is that okay? Not really? I will try my best to speak louder. So thank you for this invitation this evening. And as I was told, it's just maybe an introductory talk, half an hour, and then we'll have time with your questions to come to what is happening in the Middle East now. What next after the Arab Spring, and what can we expect in MENA, in North African countries and the Middle East? These are complex questions, and I don't think that anyone today can say and predict what is going to happen in the region. Yet, when I started writing the book about the Arab Awakening, I was quite cautious from the very beginning, and what I suggested at that time, when all the people were talking about revolutions and spring, is to be very cautious with the wording and cautious with what is happening. Unfortunately, as time passes, what I was saying, it's more and more being confirmed by what is happening on the ground. First, my intellectual position at the beginning of the process was to be cautiously optimistic. Cautiously optimistic, saying that first, I was not talking about revolutions. I still don't see any real revolution in the region, even though I can say there is something which is revolutionary in intellectual terms, is the awakening, that the people have the impression and have now understood that they have the power to change. And if what is happening up to now in Egypt, for example, in Tahrir Square, the people taking to the streets and saying no. So this is something which is in itself an intellectual revolution, but I don't see a political or economic revolution in the region. Having said that, at the same time, I'm not talking about spring or the Arab Spring, because spring first is coming from the European experience, Eastern European experience, and I don't really think that what is happening now, it's a regional dynamic. If you look at the political discourse in Tunisia, it's very much Tunisians for Tunisia and Egyptians for Egypt, and Yemenite for Yemen. It's very much nationalistic, much more than a regional process where the people are understanding that they will liberate themselves the very moment there is something which is a south-south dynamic, which is not there yet. It's not something that we can see happening. And this is one of the challenges for the future, beyond what is happening in Egypt and what is happening in Tunisia, what is happening and not happening today in Syria. There is the only way forward is very much something which is a regional dynamic, and people understanding that the destiny at the national level will have to do with the regional shift that is so important. So when I started working on what is happening and say the Arab Awakening, I was saying something that now seems to be once again very important. We were talking about people taking to the streets and massive demonstrations of people saying what? We want more freedom, we want dignity, and we want what was understood and still is democratization of the country. No more dictatorships. So we kept on talking about the political dimension of the whole dynamics. Saying these are people who were taking to the street against dictatorships. And it's right, but it's not the only parameter. I think that if we don't take into account something which is instrumental in everything which is happening today in the Middle East, which has nothing to do with the political structures, it has to do with the geostrategic reality and the economic balance of power. And we are not talking about this. It's as if it's not so important. Let us talk about the people happy to free themselves from the dictators. And I think that this way of reading it, it's making us idealizing the whole process, talking about revolution. And we don't understand that up to now, even the European countries and the United States of America are dealing with the issue not in political terms. They don't care about democracy. They don't care about the people. When I was talking to the special advisor to Sarkozy, who was telling me, we care about the blood of the Libyans, I say, yes, after 40 years. So you are supporting the dictators, Ben Ali, and then you come and you tell us it's all about humanitarian, resistance. What about the people who are now also dealing with oppression in petro-monarchies where there is no democracy? You don't care. You care much more about the geostrategic interests. And I think that this is something that has to be also a frame from which, or a window through which we read the events, by understanding that I'm not, many people understood what I was saying at the beginning. He thinks that it's a conspiracy, the Americans are behind the whole process. I never said that. I said that the American administrations and the European administration, they knew that was coming. They knew and they pushed for this. And we didn't take seriously what George W. Bush said in 2003, saying we are going towards democratization in the region. Not because they wanted democratization, but because in economic terms and in geostrategic terms, what is happening in the region is very dangerous for the two poles, the European and the Americans. Why? Because of the new actors. And the new actors are not concerned with democracy. The new actors are the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. Add to this South Africa, add to this Turkey today. And these countries that are coming in the region, for example, in less than 7 years, and 7 years on the scale of history is nothing. In 7 years, China multiplied by 8 its economic presence in the region. It's just huge. The shift, the center of gravity is now shifting towards east. And it means the three main concerns of the American administration in the region are challenged. The first one is security. The second one, the first one, let us put them right. The first one is oil. The second one is Israel. And the third one is security. If you look at this, if there is a shift towards east, beyond the political dimension, beyond democracies, beyond all what we as citizens, we care about, say, yes, people are freeing themselves. What is very important in the whole discussion, when it comes to oil, you secure the petromonarchies and you support them. So don't talk about democracy in Saudi Arabia or in Qatar or in any of the countries where oil is there. And if Bahrain is moving, let's Bahrain deal with it. Don't cover it, no media coverage. And once again, Al Jazeera was not covering Bahrain as they were covering Egypt. So this is something which is, you secure, oil is still secured in the region. And I think that beyond the democratic process, we are not talking about this, and we don't really care about that. So this is something which is important. And if you can gain some advantages in the region, like for example in Libya, let us go for a military intervention and support this with NATO. And this is what happened in Libya. And it happened in Libya, and this is why also Russia and China understood that the way it was done, with no-flight zone, the resolution in the United Nations, no-flight zone, and this was used in order to just send the NATO there. This is something which is quite interesting because the same United Nations and the same call came from the Arab League when they were asking in Gaza a no-flight zone. So it was understood no-flight zone to send NATO in Libya and no-flight zone to do nothing for the Palestinians, because the blood of the Palestinians is less important than the blood of the Libyans. And why the blood of the Libyans is important? Because they have oil. There are geostrategic interests. And if you think about what is happening now in northern Mali, don't think that northern Mali is just a bunch of terrorists who came there and now they are. No, we know now that in Mali, in Niger, the oil resources are as important as the one we found in Libya. Economic reasons are also helping us to understand the way now France, all of a sudden, is very much concerned about North Mali. Why? Because there is, and by the way the Americans were also dealing here with the whole issue is also something which is important. So I would say that if we come to this understanding, it has to do with oil. The security is to secure, the second one is Israel. And Israel, it's a very important, it's the silence of Israel on anything which is happening in all the other countries is something that we have to take into consideration. Why? Because if there are new actors in the region, we should understand something which is critical for the future. China, Russia, and all the other countries that I mentioned, they don't have the same relationship with Israel as the United States and the European countries. If the American presence is less controlling in the region, and you can see more the Chinese presence or the Russian presence, the balance of power between Israel and Palestine is going to change. And this is a critical factor in anything which has to do with the American decisions in the region. And it's as if we don't talk about this. Let us talk about, and it's as if we haven't heard the Israeli administration saying we support Mubarak for the sake of stability, because what is going to happen is something that could be very detrimental. And at the same time dealing today with the new government and dealing also with the region. And when the people, for example, I was happy to hear Noam Chomsky talking about, the very complex relationship between Israel and Syria, because we thought that the biggest enemy of Israel in the region was, in fact, at the beginning was Syria. If you look at the relationship between Syria and Israel, it's much more complex than what we think. It was an objective enemy which had very strong words but no strategy, no policy. Nothing was done by Bashar al-Assad against Israel in practical terms. Only words. But if you come to facts, nothing. They did what they want. So it was very useful because the whole strategy of Israel in the region is also to portray itself as the victims of all these bad dictators. So there is something that we have to take into account in the whole region. So my point here is to say we can't only look at the region in political terms, that the economic factors are very important, and the new shift with the geostrategic dimensions, it's important. Having said that now, and when we come to what should be, or in which way this, they have to deal with the current situation, this is where I think that we are still not witnessing revolutions, but this intellectual awakening that something could happen. And yet, all the countries are completely destabilized today. At one point when I was writing, if you go on my website, you will see that every 2 weeks I'm writing on connected to this or to other things, but I have been trying to follow what was happening. And at one point in the recent history, I was saying it might be, in fact, that the Tunisian experience will be the successful experience, hiding all the failures for all the other countries, because it doesn't work. If you look at Syria, in Egypt, in Yemen, these are problematic realities. So what is happening in these countries? And it's as if in Tunisia it was working. Now, if you look at the situation, there is in Tunisia and in Egypt and in all the countries factors, internal factors that are now putting the countries into in a situation where it's unsettled and destabilized. And this is where, beyond this Arab awakening, we need to come with very critical questions. And in fact, I have 5 critical questions for now and for the future. The first one is about the way the debates are polarized in the country. And in fact, if you deal with, when after 18 years, because I was banned from Tunisia, I haven't yet gone to Egypt, and I hope that very soon I will be able to go. But I went to Tunisia, and the people were saying, the leaders, one of my close friends before he was involved at that level, he was someone I respect very much, who is now the current president in Tunisia, Monsef Marzouki. He was a human rights activist. And there is something that you may agree or not with him, but at least he was consistent in his resistance. And he was saying, willing it or not, you have to deal with the Islamists because they have a historical legitimacy. And it's true. You might reject all what they are saying in political terms, but there is something that you cannot say, that the people are not voting for them. They are voting for them. And in fact, it happened in Palestine, and all the people were punished because they chose the wrong people. So when they are running for the democratic process, it was transparent. Even the European envoys there were saying it was completely transparent, but the Hamas was the wrong people to vote for, and then all the Palestinians were potentially extremists, and they had to pay, and especially now in Gaza. In Tunisia or in Egypt, you cannot deny the fact that for the last 50 years, the opponents to the dictators were coming from the political Islam. So when they were elections, they were supported by the people. And once again, what Monsef Marzouki was saying, I don't agree with them, but we have to deal with them. And one of the main challenges is this one, is this polarization between the secularists and the Islamists. Why it's a trap? It's there, and it's not coming from the West. This is what I wanted to say. Many people are saying, in Egypt, for example, when I have people coming, they were telling me, you know what, the West is portraying us as, Islamists versus secularists. It's not the West. It's in these countries, it's happening. It's happening that they are talking about the structure of the state, the structure of power, and this, in fact, now it's becoming a political discourse without political vision. A clash between two political discourses on the state with no real political vision. And I'm saying this in the book and analyzing this in a very critical way, when you have, for example, secularists saying to the Islamists, you are backward, you are relying on religion, you are not dealing with the state, you want a theocracy and you want a new kind of dictatorship, and we need to separate religion from the state. They are saying this to the Islamists and presenting themselves as the progressive within the country. So they are justifying their presence by being against the Islamists. If you look at the Islamist discourse, it's exactly the same. You say you are westernized, you are completely following the West, and you are bringing here the Western culture, the Western values, and you are disconnected from the people. You are an elite which is not connected with the people. This is what, and at the end of the discourse is two groups justifying their presence by the presence of the other. We are right because we are the guardian of religion, and we are right because we are the progressive minds. And then you come to the discussion and say, what is your political vision? What are your priorities? Listen to what is coming from Tunisia. Listen to what is coming from Egypt. Listen to what is not coming from all these countries. Is a political vision. How do we reform the society? How do we go from a transitional period from dictatorships to more democratic societies? We don't have this. We just have clashes between groups. And now you add something which is very difficult for the future, is the new kind of political presence of the Salafi. The Salafi, literally Salafi, were always there. We knew that they were in Egypt, in Tunisia, but they were small groups not involved in politics. All of a sudden, in 8 months, in 1 year, They entered into the political arena and they were playing within the democratic rules. What yesterday they were saying is kufr. This is just denying the Islamic reference or rejecting the Islamic reference. There is no democracy in Islam. This is what they were saying. And all of a sudden, they come in. And this is why this is something that we don't have memory. We don't remember that in the 90s, something similar happened in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, the people who were resisting the Russian presence were, in fact, at the beginning, groups that were pushed by whom the Taliban were not involved in politics, in fact, at the beginning. Who pushed the Taliban? The Americans. The Americans pushed Saudi Arabia to support the Taliban. Why? Because they were the objective allies against the Russians. And in fact, this is where the lack of political understanding of the Salafi groups can be instrumentalized by a very politically driven policy in the region. The Americans, they don't care about the Islamists if they are protecting oil and supporting their interest in the region. And they pushed the Taliban. And then after this, they were the allies, and then they became the enemies. When we needed enemies in Afghanistan in order to go there, because if you think that the Americans, they care about women's rights in Afghanistan, forget it. It's all about oil and lithium and gas in the region. This is it. This is all about it. It's the way you deal with in Asia with all these resources. It has nothing to do with this. And when the people are telling you, you know what, we went in Afghanistan to as an answer to September the 11th, it means that you are not reading. You are not reading what was said in April 2001. In April 2001, the American administration is already saying that they are going to go to Afghanistan. So they used what happened in New York to say, now it's retaliation. And they are killing Afghan people who had nothing to do with what was happening in New York. But it was used, instrumentalized with a very specific... So it's all about the economic interest in the region. What I'm saying this is that one of the main factors and one of the main challenges in the coming years is this one, is this polarization between secularists and Islamists. Add to this the Salafi. And the Salafi in Egypt, for example, they are in between the army and the religious credential. In fact, they are putting the Muslim Brotherhood or Nahda in Tunisia into a very difficult situation, telling them, you are in power, but we are the religious reference. Now they are playing in a way which is a new religious populism. And you know what is religious populism? Is to play with emotions. Is to say, look at these people, they are in power. And this is why I'm saying that some of the Islamists, they think that they have won. It might be that they are going to lose the religious credibility, with religious groups playing against them by saying, you are now compromising on religious values. So there is a tension here, and you can see this. You have seen this in the Egyptian parliament with Salafi asking to call for prayers. Very simple thing, but very emotional. Who were the people who were in the streets just after the video in Egypt? The video in the States and in Egypt. The Salafi were pushing, and then it went out of control. So what I'm saying here, that this is one of the main challenges that we have to deal with, is these tensions between the religious credential and the secularist. And the second one that we should not forget, it will be a very important one, and it still is, even though we are not talking enough about this, it's the military, the armies. This is very important. It's important in Egypt, it's important in Yemen, for example, it's very important in Syria, it's important now in the scattered reality in Libya, but the army and the reference to and when we speak about army, we are not only speaking about, military power. In Egypt, for example, the army that we are not really much talking about now, it's 60% of the economic sector. Is just an economic power which is so powerful. And the only country where we will find something which is similar, not the only country, but a country where we will find something which is similar is Algeria. Algeria, the army in Algeria has nothing to do just with military power. It's very much connected to the economic sector. And this comes to the third one, which is how are these countries going to deal with a very important challenge, is corruption. Corruption. Because when I'm saying the army is controlling 60% of the economic sector, and you can see this with the weapons, and once again, you know the cynical way of dealing with some of the conflicts. It's low intensity conflicts. You know what it means, low intensity conflicts in the State Department in the States? It means we are controlling the situation and we are selling weapons. Okay, we can sell weapons, they kill each other, but we are under control and the situation is unsettled. And at the end of the day, this is, I don't know what you think about Syria. I don't know even what I can say about Syria, but I'm not far from thinking that they agree to disagree, to let the people kill one another. And that the unsettled situation in Syria is a decision. It's to decide not to decide and to let the people being killed. And this is just a cynical way, but a destabilized Syria is much more powerful for some of the countries around. And the first one, it's Israel. Israel, contrary to what we think, is taking advantage of this situation. Contrary to what we think, and the fact that all the other countries are very fragile. Who is going to take a decision? And Dr. Morsi was very happy to found a solution in Gaza, but this is not the point. It was a solution to stop being killed, not to solve the problem. It's just to help the people not to be killed. And by the way, it's something that was very good also for, in many ways, I don't have time to go maybe with your question, it was also very interesting for the Israeli strategy in the region, to be powerful and at the same time to show that they are ready to negotiate. And it's very good with what could be internal politics in Israel. It's also very important. No, so the third challenge is this one, is corruption. And I don't see anything which is now solved in the region. Very much the opposite. In Egypt now, the level of, recently the Prime Minister Kandil was on Al Jazeera and he was asked about corruption and said, we do whatever we can, but the situation is the corruption is everywhere. It's in the army, it's the old regimes, and it's exactly the same in all the countries. So this is one of the challenges where you can't go towards a democratic process if you are not acting against corruption within power. So this is the third challenge that are so important. Add to this very quickly three other challenges that I wanted to add, and I will end with this. The fourth one is the reality of social justice within the society. So the gap between the poor and because the fact that it happened, it's also, and we know this, the ingredients that helped the massive demonstrations to happen had to do with the economic situation and the socio-economic situation. Muhammad Bouazizi, when he self-immolated himself, he was sending a message that it's a message of poverty. Just the 1.5 years before the demonstrations in the country, what the people were facing is unemployment. The food prices were rising. This was the reality. The people who were coming back from Egypt and from Tunisia were saying it's going to implode because the economic situation is bad and poverty is there. So this is also something which is essential, is how do you deal with social justice and poverty in the country. In Egypt, you have 1 million new inhabitants every 8 months. So it's just growing in a way which is how we are going to deal with this. So you need to have something which is a social policy. Instead of having secularists against Islamists, what is your social policy? What are you going to do with this? And there is a fifth one which is important. It's the educational policy. Because at the end, education is central if you are talking about development, if you are talking about freedom. And I'm saying this because I'm just fed up with all this discussion. I'm asked to come and to comment on all this, international media. What do you think about, the Muslim Brotherhood and all this? And you end up always talking about the same thing, the last clashes that you are facing. And you don't talk about social policy. You don't talk about education. You don't talk about the challenges of these countries and the countries are facing. And when it comes to, once again, say, Don't you think that the women are going to be the first victims of these revolutions after? I say, what are you talking about? What is the point? And you end up having a journalist saying, yes, but look, now I can see much more headscarves in the street. I say, okay, the empowerment of women is, calculated on how many headscarves you have in the streets. You laugh at it, but it's just the way people are now dealing with, media coverage and emotional politics. It's about the headscarves. What we have to say and what we have to repeat, the only way to get this empowerment of women is based on two conditions. The first one is access to education. The second is access to the job market. You want empowered women to come to with these two conditions. Don't tell me about the way they dress, but the way they are educated or not educated, and the way they are getting jobs and not getting jobs. These are the two conditions. Are they dealing with this or not? Is this something which is a priority? I don't see it, and this is critical for the future. And I would say, and this is the last challenge, and not the least of them, but something that, once again, it's so important. I was starting with this, and I want to end with this, is the reality of the economic vision and the economic policy in the future. Because now it's clear, whoever you are, at the end of the day, you can be, and I keep on repeating this, because it's also to think about an alternative. If we are talking about liberating people in the South, it's not going to be only by promoting a democratic system. It's also by challenging the economic powers. And this is the big question. Now you can be an Islamist, you can say there is no democracy in Islam, you can say women cannot drive, and you are welcome wherever you want in the West if you are a neoliberal system, capitalist system, and promoting the Western interest. You want an example? All the petromonarchies. And the first one is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is just saying, the people I'm talking to, some of the Salafis say, what are you talking about? Democracy is not Islamic. It's not Islamic. There is nothing like democracy in Islam. So the king is Khadim al-Haramain. He's the servant of the two. Okay, and that's fine. Women, you don't drive. You don't vote. And the West is quiet. And the Muslims are quiet. And the world is quiet. Because it has to do with the interest. Now, the big question here is, which kind of economy are you supporting? Can we come with something which is a shift into the center of gravity of the economic power? We can't now have something which is an alternative model. We don't have an alternative model to the neoliberal model. But we can, from within today, come with something which is a new balance of power. By doing this, not to idealize China, not to idealize India, but to deal with these new powers to counterbalance the power of the West. I think that the region should get rid of this West against or versus Islam, or West versus the Middle East. Something new should happen, which is to play with the different roles. And there is a country, I'm very critical of the way they are dealing with the economic order, but still I should acknowledge that they came with something which is quite interesting. It's Turkey. Turkey, I'm critical about what is happening within, but they came with something which is a South new type of relationship. In less than 5 years, they opened up to 50 embassies, and mainly in Africa. And they are dealing now, they said to the EU, you don't want us? We will see who in the future is going to be in need of the other. And in fact, towards China, India, South Africa, they are shifting their policy. And today, in economic terms, they are doing much better than all the European countries. So as it was said by some, it might be that the EU is much more in need of Turkey now than Turkey. But that's the irony of history. The point is that this shift towards South is also something that the global South should think about. And I don't see this happening after the kind of new types of way of dealing with freedom and the democratization process. But this is a very important challenge, is the economic equation here. Can we find another way of dealing with the economic order today? And to challenge what is said with Latin American countries, African countries, Asian countries. Don't forget that in Asia, for example, if you deal with, we are not talking about this, we are talking about China and India. But there are other countries. There is a very important axis between Turkey and Malaysia. Indonesia, it's a very important country. Indonesia is now experiencing something which is an economic revolution. And we need to take this into account. Something can come, it's coming from there. It's not only China, competing with the United States, but it's also all these countries. And here we need to put the Middle East in the middle of this new equation, with leaders questioning the order that we are facing today. And it's also something, and this is my last word here, is it also has to do, and I'm always connecting economy with cultural resistance. We are talking about world culture, and very often the way it's understood, world culture is westernization, and it's not completely wrong. If you think that Coca-Cola is just what you drink, you don't get the point that it's a way of life. They are right by saying this. Drink Coca-Cola and you get it. Anyway, and now we have halal Coca-Cola. Anyway, so in Islamic terms, my point is this one, is what is important in any process of democratization in the Middle East. It's also to think, as some of the challenges, is which type of cultural creativity and resistance are you promoting? Are you just entering into the global world, global economy and global culture, or are you now reconciling the countries with their own culture? And what is very important is for the Egyptians, for the Tunisians, for the people in the Middle East to reconcile themselves with their culture, the creativity of the culture. Because there is no democratic stability without cultural creativity. There is no, it cannot be. If you are alien to your own culture, democracy is just an imposed system. It has to be nurtured by your own culture, to make it your model, to make it yours. Not to have a democracy that is imported from the states in Iraq. At the end of the day, we are protecting more the oil resources than the museums, as you know. That they were not protecting the cultural creativity in Baghdad, but much more the oil resources. The point is the cultural resistance is part of the democratization in the Middle East. And it's as if we don't talk about this, because democracy is not only it's not procedures. It's mindset and well-being. And there is something which is missing in all what is coming now from the Middle East. Is that what is missing is to talk about this dimension of well-being within the society. Well-being is to feel reconciled with your own being. It's something which is coming beyond the identity crisis that we are facing. One of the problems that we have in Europe, for example, you know that our democracies are in crisis. You know this. Some of the countries are now dealt with by technocrats that we never voted for, but they are here. And they are telling us the way we have to deal with the economy and how to deal with the crisis. Our democracies are in crisis. But don't forget something, that our democracies are in crisis as much as our cultures are in crisis. There is a very deep identity crisis in Europe. And this identity crisis is a cultural crisis. Who are we? And it's connected to where are we heading? What are we doing? So this connection between cultural crisis and economic crisis is something that we have to keep in mind. And it's happening now in the Middle East the same way. And I think that we have to solve this as the challenges. So once again, you were asking me what after? I don't know. The only thing that I know is which questions we are facing in the Middle East today, and in which way we have to avoid this very narrow, simplistic perception that is reducing the Middle East as a struggle between secularists and Islamists. This is not going to help either the countries or ourselves in our understanding of the Middle East as a starting point. Thank you.
very much, Eric, for a fascinating talk. We're now going to go to questions from the audience. I ask only one thing in your questions, and that is please keep them short. Think about what you want to say, then make it shorter, then write it down, and then you can ask it, because we want to get through as many as possible. So, questions. A lady just
You're talking a lot about the economy, and I was wondering to what extent you think that the economic liberalization of the 70s and later implemented in the 2000s have affected social inequalities in the region, and how, like today, and how you see an alternative to neoliberalism in the future. Sorry.
Why are you apologizing? Yes, it's another lecture. Look, I think it has, of course, it has effect. I think that, on what, at the beginning, I don't know if you know Arundhati Roy, the Indian thinker. She was, very quickly she said, what is happening in the Middle East has nothing to do with the true democratization process, it's just opening the markets. And I think that the Bush administration and the West in this, it's clear that we were reaching an end as to it was impossible to carry on this economic relationship and to get advantage of the situation and the job and freeing the markets in the region without getting rid, or at least to reconsider the role of the old dictatorships and the dictators. That something which is interesting is that we were told that after Mubarak, his son was coming, Gamal Mubarak. Gamal Mubarak was controlling, some were saying, up to half of the economic power in Egypt and the big enterprises. And what is very interesting is that during the last 4 years, he was directing his business towards China. Because there is something which is quite interesting. China doesn't ask you about your democratic credentials. The most important is the market. So they don't have this rhetoric. It's do whatever you want. At the end of the day, if you open the market, it's important. So I think that there is here this the neoliberal system was playing a very important role in the region, and it's one of the reasons of what we are now witnessing as a shift. Now, is there an alternative to this global economic order? Today, I think that no one has an alternative. It's as if all the politicians, even the Islamists, the Islamists at the beginning of the 20th century, if we are serious about the history, I was presented, as the grandson of Hassan al-Banna. If I come back to what he was saying, you will see in what he was saying in the 30s and the 40s, things that were very close to the liberation theology in South Africa, in South America. If you go to Gutierrez and all the people using this as a political and economic resistance, this is what they were talking about in the 30s and the 40s. Now the Islamists are almost all capitalist and neoliberal, supporting the neoliberal system. They don't have a problem to deal with the World Bank or the IMF. This is the reality of it, that there is a shift in this. So is it possible to see something which is a resisting trend in the region? I don't see it now. But I think that for the future, if we want and we are serious about true democratization in the region, you cannot get an alternative system, but you need to play in a different way within the system. So in which way there is a front of a resistant front within that could help to come with something which is new. And to stop talking about this very simplistic way of dealing with the Islamic economy that we have, this very simplistic attitude. We don't have an Islamic economy. We might have Islamic ethics in economy. But my point here is that I don't see an alternative. But there is no way forward, in my view, but to think about an alternative. And at least a shift in the power relationship with the... So I would say we have to stop this obsession, and still the Islamists are so obsessed with the recognition by the West of their status as, democratically elected, that they are so obsessed with this that sometimes they are forgetting that the most important thing is really to deal with new and to try to be creative as to new economic forces that we don't have now. I don't see this happening, unfortunately.
More questions? There's a man in the red jumper in the second row. That's you. Yeah.
You talked about the petromonarchies, and the Saudis are probably the linchpins, symbolically at least. What happens regionally in the dynamic of power and influence when the Suderi 7 eventually pass away, which, considering their age, can't be that far away?
Is this good news or bad news?
Well, I'm asking as in, what do you think?
No, I'm joking. I got that. I don't think that, we have been told a few years ago, I remember when I was dealing with the region and studying this, the people were saying, oil resources are to cover the next 25 years and it will be, now we know it's going to be longer than that. And I think that they will have, they will last as long as the oil resources are going to last. So if it's not them with the regime and the system, they are protected. They are protected. And they are protected in a very, very, very strong way. So it's, even, in Bahrain, the way it was presented, the whole struggle within was completely distorted. It's as if Shia Sunni, and by the way, I forgot one of the challenges here, because I talk about the Salafi within the Sunni tradition, but one of the main challenges will be the Shia Sunni divide and fracture. And, on my website, when I write an article, I'm insulted by so many people these days, because some are saying, oh, you are supporting the resistance in Syria because you are Sunni and you are against Bashar. And just to say something, which they say, no, I'm sorry, Bashar is a dictator. So I'm just against a dictator. Now, and it's exactly the same in Bahrain. It's to be on the side of the oppressed, whatever is their religion or their trend. But what you have here is they are protected in a way which is pushing in a direction where nothing is going to happen now there. And if something is going to happen, it's going to be under control. So I don't see anything happening as long as the oil resources are there and they have to be protected. And then it's even deeper than this, because in the whole equation, there is a new actor now that is playing a very important role in many ways, and it's Qatar. And Qatar is playing in different ways. They were very much involved in Libya. They are very much involved in Syria. They are going as far as saying we have to sell and to give weapons to the resistance. And something which is a symbol which was quite important. You know the importance of symbols in the region. For the last 10 years, when we were to talk about the Palestinian resistance, who were the people who were understood as the strongest in the resistance? The Shia people. Iran as a state, Hezbollah as a trend, and they were very powerful. And in 2006, they were perceived as the people who defeated, in 2008, defeated the Israeli army. And in the Muslim majority countries and the Arab world, they were the people who were the more consistent with the way of resisting, in the way they were resisting to Israel. And over the last few years, you can see that things were moving now, and the first happened with Turkey, in a very symbolic way, standing up, in Davos, and then with the flotilla, and now in Gaza, 2 weeks ago, or it was last month, the Sheikh of Qatar going there and showing that they were supporting Gaza. This was before what happened. And in fact, in symbolic terms, it's very powerful. The Sunni now are coming and showing how much they care about Gaza. But this is, a game based on symbols. And I think that here you have to see that Qatar and these countries in the region are playing an interesting role supporting the American strategy, not being too much against their interest in the region, protecting their interest, and having Al Jazeera playing a very, very important role, in fact, in all the uprisings. Al Jazeera was very instrumental in Syria, in Egypt, and in Tunisia, and less in other countries. And this was the people who were saying, oh, they are neutral, they are coming with the other side of the story. You know, this was in the end of the 90s, when I wrote a paper and I was asked about Al Jazeera. I said at that time, I'm very cautious, and so cautious that I refused to be part of any programs there, because my sense is that this was ideologically oriented. So we have to be very cautious with all these different actors and factors in the region.
In the orange.
I'm just really curious about the historically devoid analysis that we see day in and day out about these issues. I mean, it doesn't seem that we are looking at this in a proper historical context. Nobody seems to look at the colonial period properly. Nobody seems to be interested even in looking at this. You know, I mean, these issues probably are rooted in the Tanzimat period and just after in the Mandate period. And nobody seems to care. No, be it academics, public intellectuals, or journalists. Nobody seems to care about this. Why is that?
This is directed to me.
Yes.
Thank you. I think you're right that we don't care enough about history and the reasons and many of the factors that are beyond the recent history. And I would say two things to respond to your question. I would say still there are recent dynamics and power struggle that we have to take into account and we can understand. But we can't carry on analyzing this without looking beyond and getting a sense of history. And especially in the region. It's as if we are dealing with, actions now and no historical in-depth when it comes to the whole parameters. For example, when it comes to Turkey, when it comes to the relationship between the Arabs, when it comes to the relationship with the colonizers, all this, it's critical. We have, and I said it, even in recent history, the problem is that we are forgetting very quickly. Things that happened, 20 years ago, we just don't care about this. It's as if it's just immediate politics. Because the problem that we have is in the way we analyze this, we are dealing with the political timing. And the political timing is between two elections. And the political timing between two elections is exactly the opposite of, the long-run historical changes. And even with, what we call revolutions, where revolutions are going to show you their results in 5 years. That's not going to happen. So we are short in our analysis. That I completely agree. Now, my point is, you are not going to get the whole picture only through the historical, but it's a more complete understanding of what is happening, and I completely agree with this. And this is why I'm always saying, you know what, in our schools, in our societies now, in our democracies, we need to reconcile our students with 4 disciplines. The first one is history. The second one is philosophy. It's good to know how it works. It's not to respond to the question why we are here. The third one is history of and religions, the understanding of religions, because it's critical. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not a religious conflict, but you cannot get the final answer if you don't get a sense of the religious background there, because it's so important. And the fourth one is history. History is necessary, and unfortunately in our universities, and the way we are dealing with media now, there is a lack of historical understanding, which is very, very counterproductive and cannot help us to understand what is happening. And I agree on that.
The purple shirt.
Just very quickly, you talked about corruption before, and I was wondering if you could be more precise and tell us, corruption of who? Corruption towards who?
Who?
Who is corrupting?
Who is corrupting whom?
Do you want a list of names?
No, you know, what is corruption? Corruption, if you try to get in political terms, is lack of transparency. Okay, lack of transparency. We have it in many ways. We have it when it comes to the army, and the army is not in having the role we are expecting from an army. They are dealing with power. And when it comes to all the contracts that we have in economic terms, so they are taking, you know, the government's taking money and directing this money towards Western banks or as we had with the dictators. Still, this is there. So corruption of institutions, the army is one of them, the state. Corruption through, you know, transnational corporation when it comes to selling weapons or transactions, and this is also something which is important. And at all the levels, you will see that there is a lack of transparency in economic terms. Now, it's also something that we can find in political terms, where there is a lack of transparency in the way things are working. So even in political terms now, we are very far from having transparent democratic processes, and this has to be reformed from within in political terms. So institutions, people, political powers, and the way we are dealing with the money that should come back to the people, and now it's not coming back to the people, it's coming back to some elites and some corrupt people that are using this money.
Taken 3 questions from the back. So at the back, I see a hand right on there.
Yeah, thank you first of all for the lecture, Professor. I just wanted to ask you a sort of 2-part question.
If we can make it a 1-part question, that would be great.
Just to sort of try and understand the better issue about describing the Muslim Brotherhood and Nahda as more perhaps as pragmatists, and instead of sort of carrying the religious carrying a religious and emotional aspect. How far do you think the Ikhwan and the Nahda are aware of the fact that the Salafists currently are the ones that are carrying sort of the more religious and emotional aspects of the population? Just to very quickly, the second part, really, I just was wondering, do you think how ripe do you think the Qatari population are for a revolution themselves?
Okay. Just one thing before I come to your questions, the 2 questions that you asked me about corruption, and I just wanted to tell you something which is important. When it comes to corruption in the countries, for example in Egypt or Tunisia, and still the people are facing this, you know, I love the African countries. I'm always in, you know, this is a continent that I cherish a lot. And I always said to the Africans, when it comes to corruption and the situation, you know, you can sit down and blame the West. But at the end of the day, nothing will happen in Africa if the African people and now the Middle Eastern people are not understanding that this is where they are the subject of their own history. That if you want to deal with a democratic process, you cannot blame the West for this. Corruption is coming from within. Corruption is today an African reality. It's a Middle Eastern, it's an Arab reality. And if the Arabs are just sitting down and saying the West is no, Benabi was saying we have been colonized because we were colonizable. We are corrupt because we are corruptible. Is this an English term? You understand what I mean. Okay, so I think that this is the reality. I'm tackling this because it's coming back to the societies themselves. And this is where the people should deal with it, because this is a disease, this is a cancer from within, and it's everywhere. Coming to your questions when it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood and Nahda and the pragmatism and the Salafi. The first question is about the relationship between the 2 trends. This was the first question.
Yeah, and sort of the pragmatists are aware of the fact that they probably don't carry right now. It's not religious legitimacy as perhaps the Salafists in some other
I don't think it's as simple as that. I think that they understand, when I was in Tunisia and I was talking to people, they understand that the Salafi are here and playing a very strange role, and also pushed by people who apparently are completely against Salafism. So Salafism is very much against the West, but in the West, some are very happy to have people who are very much against the West. You get my point? So to push these trends by saying, look, we saw this everywhere. We saw this even in the West. Some trends are pushed just to demonize them and to show that this is exactly why the West is right to deal with this in such a way with Islam. So the Salafi, once again, the RAND Corporation issued a report just after the elections in Egypt saying that just before the election, $80 million came from Saudi and Qatari organizations, not the state, to support the Salafi there. And you cannot just, you know that these countries are also connected with Western interests, so they are pushed. And now, you are right. I think that if you look at the Nahda and the Muslim Brotherhood and even Islah and even now in Morocco, the Islamists that are presenting themselves as reformists are very pragmatic. So they are ready to deal with the new situation. But the cost here is the religious credential. And they see what is happening on the ground with people questioning their religious credential. So they understand that this is now a challenge for them. So how Islamic are you and how much Islam is in your project? And this is where they are challenged. So on one side, the secularists, on the other side, people who are more Islamic or perceived as more Islamic. And it's an emotion. So emotional politics is everywhere. In fact, I'm living in Europe, and I keep on repeating that one of our main challenges as Europeans to the Westerners is very much populism. Populism with the Tea Parties in the States and populism everywhere. So, this rhetoric that emotional politics is exactly the same in the Middle East, based on the religious reference. So we have populism now, and this is something which they are in danger, and this is why you are seeing now in Tunisia, for example, very tough decisions against the Salafi. You know that you have some hunger strikes in jail now, and it's very tense about this, and they have now the potential to destabilize the countries in a very, very difficult way for all the actors. So of course this is something which is a tension from within the Sunni tradition, which is going to be very, very important. And by the way, I would tell you everywhere, even in the West, we are dealing exactly with the same problem. The second question was about...
Qatari people, are they ready for revolution?
Yes, so no, when you are dealing with people in the Middle East, and I go to Qatar and I work there, have a center there, and I said it from the very beginning. I'm working there in a project which has to do with Islamic legislation and ethics with one condition: I should be free to say whatever I want to say. And I kept on repeating this for the last, and you can see in my books, I'm very critical, and I will keep on being critical because I think that this is the way it should be. Now, when you talk about democracy in Qatar, they are telling you, but the people are happy. And it's true that if you look only at the Qatari people, they are happy. Now, if you look at the immigrants there, the way they are treated, the way the people are working, it's just not acceptable. Things have to be, and I said it straight away there. I say, I'm involved in a project on the migrants, and say the way they are treated is not acceptable. So the people who are not happy are not the people who can change and demonstrate. It's not going to happen there. This is where to wait for an uprising there, I think you can wait for a long time. But to be critical on principles, to say, look, it's democratization is not about happiness. It's also about the dignity of the people that are coming to build this country, the way you are treating them. And you will have the World Cup in a few years. I don't care about the nice stadiums you are going to have. Who is going to build this? at which cost? And we have to be critical. This is the voice that is very important. But as to the strategy with the biggest military bases, it's in Qatar now. It's the most powerful. Everything that had happened in Iraq, just the second Gulf War, was commanded through this American basis there. So I think that this is where don't expect it coming from the people, but we have a critical role to play in questioning the regimes and the very essence of transparency and democracy over there.
I'm going to take questions in rounds of 3 now. So if we go 1, 2, and then right at the back on the left there. So if we go yours first, I'll write them down.
Thank you for your lecture. Do you believe that the emergence of the political vision in Saudi Arabia with the fundamentalist practice of Islam in the country, and is Morsi an example of progressive Islamism?
And the second?
So the beginning was, what was the beginning?
Do you believe that the emergence of the political vision in Saudi Arabia and the fundamentalist practice of Islam in the country?
Thank you very much for the lecture. You said that the political and economical alternative in these countries has to be built with a reference to their own culture. So my question is, how, which ideas, which values of these cultures can help to build an alternative, and in particular regarding Islam and Islamic ethics?
And the last question right there. Nice and loud, please.
Yeah, is there like a middle group between secularists and Islamists who maybe want a platform of Islamic law on which to build rights such as freedom of expression and women's rights?
So the first question is on the emergence of political vision in Saudi Arabia and Morsi. The second one was what aspects of culture can help build democracy? And the third one is there a middle group between secularists and Islamists?
I'm trying to follow as well. I think it's interesting. I don't like any type of essentialization of a country by saying in Saudi Arabia it's petromonarchies and nothing is happening. I think that within the country we have trends that are very interesting in Saudi Arabia. So I don't see any change in the Western policy towards Saudi Arabia because they are protected. But from within the Saudi society, you have trends where you have religious voices that are critical, you have opposition, and you have women that are more and more educated in the country. And I think that we have to keep this in mind, that it might be that on the long run, something could also be a reform dimension, a reform trend within the country. Is it going to be powerful enough to question or to challenge the power of the regime now? For the time being, I don't see it. But on the long run, if you go beyond the political timing and think about in terms of generation, it could be that the next generation after 25 years, something could be quite important. And the links between the Saudis and other countries and other trends and this understanding could be important. Add to this, what is needed now is very much a reform of the educational system in Saudi Arabia, and especially when it comes to religious teaching and the religious reference. But you had a second question that I forgot. Is
Morsi an example of progressive Islamism?
I don't know. I don't know if it's an example. I think that he came last year, 2 years ago, he was invited by students, he was in Oxford, and I was chairing a session with him, and I asked him 6 questions. I'm referring to this in the book. I'm saying that we were together, and I asked him 6 questions about what are the challenges. And the answers that he gave me at that moment were disappointing. Why? Because he was repeating what I was reading coming from the 40s. It's, you know, the way we refer to Sharia. But over the last year, or just before the election and after the election, he moved a great deal. Is he moving because of just political reasons, or is just you know, pragmatism, or he's playing, or is this just a way life is? Because when you are dealing with power, you have to change. On many of the views, he has people advisors that are quite smart and quite visionary. So he surprised many people, and I was the first to be surprised with some of the decisions. Now, the last thing which is happening now, it's worrying, and there are lots of questions. I'm not following all this, you know, fear that, oh, we are going back to dictatorship. I want to see if this is a way to go beyond all these tensions that are put in order to preventing them from moving to the next step. It could be that this is, at least this is what they are saying, that we are doing this just to go to the next step after the constitution. It has to be seen. It has to be assessed. Now, to say it's progressive for the time being, I wouldn't say this. I wouldn't say it's progressive. I would say it's still, he's still trying to be very pragmatic. You know, to be pragmatic is not to be progressive. To be pragmatic means you are pragmatic. You're just dealing with the issue. You're just trying your best. Progressive is something else. Progressive, by the way, doesn't mean, for me, I don't like all this business of to be progressive. It means to be liberal as we are. You know, the way some people are dealing with progressive is you are progressive if you think the way I think in the West. This is not progressive. This is sometimes intellectual colonization. I'm saying progressive means that you have a political vision, that you are ready to deal with the challenges of your time. It doesn't mean that you are betraying your principles, but you understand that your principles cannot be dogmatically imposed. You are dealing with reality and you have a vision. So the opposite of a progressive mind is not an alien mind, it's a dogmatic mind. It's just to look at your principles and you want to implement them whatever is the situation. But I wouldn't promote a progressive mind which is an alienated mind, which is no roots, no reference. I think that you can be faithful to principles and a specific ethics and be very progressive. But today, I wouldn't say we can see it, because it's all unsettled, it's all in progress, and we have in this to be cautious in our assessment. You were talking about cultural and ethics, and I allocated time for this because many people, when they read the book, they were surprised that I came with something which is very strong on this, because I am very serious about that. For many reasons. My own experience I have been working in southern countries for years, in South America with the liberation theology movement, in Africa, very much involved in South Africa, and I understood something from my own experience. All this business about democracy and rules, if you talk about them in such a way, it's just structures. But life is not about structures. Life is not about voting. Life is about well-being. Life it's about, reconciling yourself with the collective memory and the collective psychology. And I think that this is something which is so important in the Arab world. The Arab world are facing this very deep crisis of identity, obsessed. And a crisis of identity is something that I'm always saying this on a personal experience. Sometimes let me put it that way. As a human being, you have principles and you have instincts. And sometimes your instincts are driving you towards things that your mind and your conscience is not very happy with. You get my point? So it's a human experience. So we are attracted. You get me, huh? Yes, I'm sure you know exactly what I mean. So we are human beings at the end of the day. So this tension that we have the fact that you are attracted with your instincts and resistant with your conscience makes you sometimes reject what you like. What is attracting, you reject it with your conscience. The Muslims and the Arab countries today are facing this with the West. Very much attracted and very much rejecting. But they reject very powerfully because they know that they are attracted. And this is, you get my point? You understand? In psychological terms, it's a very important one. Because if you don't solve this problem in psychological, collective psychology, you can speak about democracy, but at the end, these are principles without feelings, without reconciliation. And at the end, you are tense. You experience this tension between what is attractive and what is not you. It's alien to who you are or what you think you are, which is deeper even. And my sense on this is that the Muslim majority countries and the Arabs should come to a reconciliation through first memory, second education, and third, which is exactly what I don't care, I am against even talking about Islamic State and qualifying Islamic economy, reconciliation on the basis of ethics. What are your values and what are your objectives? So in fact, for example, if you are in a Muslim majority country or in Arab country, it's very important, for example, to value and to give value to the language. It's good to speak English. It's very good to speak Arabic in an Arab majority country because Arabic is your language. So instead of talking English because it's the new international language, to speak English and at the same time speak your language. An educational process that is giving value to indigenous languages, which is so important. Now the culture, creativity in culture means what is produced by the Arabs, what has been produced by the Arabs over the last 30 years in arts, in literature, in creativity, in movies. You cannot always come back to the Al-Andalus. Go back to, this was so great. Look at this architecture. That's fine, but this is the past. Now, if you come to our time now, there is something which is a lack of creativity. So it's not only ethics, it's culture, creativity, and when you want to reconcile a collective psychology with its own memory and the roots, don't talk about, for example, all the people who are coming and say, Muslim majority country, was it important, is about rules? No. Islam is not rules only. It's a universe of reference. It's a feeling also. It's objectives. And I think that this is where the Arab countries are completely lost in this discussion. Don't care about the language. Don't care about the culture. To care about arts. To care about beauty. To care about creativity is something which is so important. And it might be that the West, we also have to come to this very deep understanding. It's just not to produce to sell, but to produce to be. If you get my point.
And a third way between Islamists and secularists?
Ah, yes, okay. I forgot this one. I tried to avoid it. There is a third way. In fact, we find people, and in fact the third way is in between. You find, and it's not new. It's not new. It's, I don't know if you heard about the movement Kifaya in Egypt.
How do you spell that?
Kifaya. Kifaya means enough, it's enough. Kifaya يعني stop it. And this movement was a political movement with secularists and Islamists coming together. The third way has been, over the last 15 years, people coming from the Islamists, the Islamist strands and the secularist strands, and saying we have to work together. At least we have a common enemy. And at that time, at the beginning, 15 years ago, it was Mubarak, it was Ben Ali. They are still in minority. The great majority were not talking to one another. They were scattered and in opposition. So there are in between, and this is why I was referring to Monsef Marzouri, because from the very beginning he said we should deal with the Islamists. And in fact, the people supported this. They supported this, and all the secularists who were saying we don't want to deal with the Islamists, they got 2, 3, 4% of the votes. It's only the people who are saying we have. Now things are moving because the experience, and this is why it's quite interesting. You see that you have been elected or you are now in power, and all of a sudden you are losing your basis, you are losing, your power because you are not delivering, you are perceived as, compromising on so many things. So things could change now if we go towards, transparency. So I think that the third way, it's people who are trying to come with this type of new alliances, understanding that we have common vision. Now, another way of dealing with this polarization in these countries, I think you won't find it because in fact it's too polarized. It's very much to try to build bridges to bridge the divide between the trends that is going to be important. And I think that this is the future. The future are for the people who are not denying the legitimacy of the political Islam. You have to deal with them anyway. And I think that some of them are very, very, very interesting in the way they are dealing with politics, and they are coming with new ideas in the political, out of pragmatism. For example, let me just add this because I think it's important. It's not by denying the right of some political trends to be involved in politics that you are helping them to move on. In fact, it's by being involved. And the best example is in Turkey. 10 years ago, the people were saying, oh, these are Islamists, they are not going to deal. And in fact, they are becoming pragmatic, understanding priorities, and because they are dealing with politics. Now, it's good because they are opening up. The point is, by being too pragmatic and opening up, you end up accepting things that, for me, are disputable when it comes to the economic order, for example. So it's good to be pragmatic, but pragmatic at the price of your principles when it comes to, resisting the economic order. This is the problem. And, we're talking about corruption, but power corrupts. Power, it can corrupt the best minds. And I saw people before being in power, they were so nice. And when they were in power, much less.